And welcome to Victory Talk Radio here on Victory Radio, Music for the Soul. And I am very pleased to introduce to you tonight Clarence Shuler, who is an author, relationship counselor, motivational speaker, life coach, president and CEO of BLR, which is Building Lasting Relationships, and I understand he's also a pretty darn good basketball player. So, Clarence, welcome to the show.
Hey, John, thanks so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to being with you, and again, thanks for this opportunity.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself and your ministry and how you came to know the Lord. Well,
years ago, I grew up in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and when I was about 14 years old, I won't go into all the details, so I ran into a guy named Gary Chapman, and they had a gym at the church he was going to, and growing up in North Carolina, they had basketball, tobacco, and Baptist, and so I fell in love with basketball. So I went to that church and got to know Gary, and after watching his life for a couple of years, he introduced me to Jesus Christ, and so he's been discipling me ever since. And you probably know him now as the author of the 5 Love Languages. Back then, he was not really famous at that point in time.
Your book is called Single and Free to Be Me. Tell us a little bit about that book, and I guess my first question also would be, does today's society put too much emphasis on getting married?
Well, I think it does, and I think by doing that, I think it puts a lot of pressure on singles. Now, 95% of people want to get married, but I think in the church, it comes across in society and also the church is that if you're not married, most singles tell me, as I've interviewed them and spent time with them, that they feel less than. And I know I was in my 30s before I got married, and people often felt you came across something's wrong with you. You know, if you were really okay, you'd be married by now. So it can be really tough.
We just mentioned that. I think sometimes we do stigmatize those who decide to remain single.
Well, you know, I think kind of like in the last question that it's like they are lacking something, or they're spiritually deficient, or they don't have enough faith. And so, or sometimes people think there's sin in their life.
We know that Apostle Paul, he actually called it a blessing if someone was single because they could focus more on their ministry for God.
Well, that's true. That you're not, in some sense, it's not probably the best word, but in some ways distracted. And so I think that's what Paul was talking about, that whole idea of just really being focused as the thing we could do more.
And you also talk about contentment in your book. Explain why that is so important before you get married.
Well, to me, like I said, being in my 30s before I got married, I think it's real important. A friend of mine has developed a phrase, and the phrase is simply this: if you're not content being single, you won't be content in a friendship, a dating relationship, or in a marriage. And it's kind of probably another question we'll talk about, a concept. I think we need to have this understanding of self-worth, not self-worship. But when we aren't content being single, we tend to think that we need somebody else to complete us, and because we're deficient. And what often happens then is we sort of develop what I call a codependent, dysfunctional relationship. And unintentionally, we put that person that we think we like on performance track that they need to please us, because we really, it turns out we tend to be selfish in that whole idea. So, and we don't understand what God says in Colossians 2:10, that in Him you've been made complete. So I say if you're a Christian, you're complete. You don't have to be in a marriage relationship.
And also, it seems like sometimes in society that whether it's the man or the woman thinks that getting married is going to fulfill all their needs, and that's kind of the wrong way to look at that, I think.
I agree with you. I mean, a lot of people think marriage is utopia, and if that's the case, we wouldn't have so many divorces. And so I think sometimes we go into marriage with a selfish mindset. I mean, no, we aren't selfish to some degree, but I think it's just more selfish what they can do for me than actually what we can do for them, which is sort of a counterculture mindset from a Christian perspective going into marriage.
Right. In your book too, you talk a little bit about, back in the olden days, they didn't call it dating, they called it courting, and kind of talk a little bit about the difference between how they did it then, and obviously they had a lower divorce rate. What did they do differently that doesn't work now in dating?
Well, I hate to talk about this because it kind of shares my age, but I remember, courting really. Historically, the guy would have to go to the girl's house. And by going to the girl's house, he would usually go there for dinner. And the good thing about that is that the guy did not have to have money. So courting was not based on money. It's really based on character. And back then, most children, young people, had a father and mother. And typically, the girl did not leave out of the house, didn't move out of the house until she got married. And so when a young man came by, a potential spouse came by, the mom and dad could check him out, and they were sort of like a buffer zone or protection for the girl. And after the boy left or the young man left, they could tell the girl, he's got good qualities, or he doesn't, blah, blah, blah. The parents would talk to him, find out about how he was brought up, how he was raised. All those things are really important in relationships, and today we tend not to have that. But later, as history, as things continue, I don't know if call it progress, but the young girls as singles began to move out of their homes and go and live in the city. And then dating became the thing to do as opposed to courting. So the girl did not simply have a mother or father to check out this suitor or this person who wanted to date them. And then also dating, you weren't going to their house for dinner typically because didn't make the girls feel safe, so they would meet you somewhere, you come pick them up and take them out. But then dating became a financial deal, so you had to have some money to date. So it changed the dynamics quite a bit. And that's sort of the biggest difference between dating and courting, that courting really had your parents or family back there to check out the person who's coming. And typically, I remember this, my mother had a real good friend that she worked with and had a beautiful young girl that I wanted to date. And I think I was 16, 17. And even though her parents knew me, I had to go to her house 3 or 4 times before they ever let me take her out. And that was kind of tough. You had to get by dad. And but I think it was a great way to protect, young ladies and also the young man as well.
Now, I understand you dated a model once, and you were ready to marry her, but your family kind of gave you the thumbs down on that.
Oh, you read that? Okay. I think thank God I was in love, being in love, and she was beautiful. I was in D.C., so I was a glorified gopher. Folks I worked for were pretty influential movers and shakers in D.C., and so if I had her on my arm, we walked into a party. Everybody's head turned. And she was a nice girl, had a nice family, but her lifestyle and mine were a little bit different. And so, but when I brought her home, my dad had passed at that point in time. So my mom and dad, my sister and my mother, they gave thumbs down, said no way. And I trusted my mom and dad, and also my mom and my sister. And I knew that I was more in love being in love. And so one of the hardest things I ever did was break up with her, but I knew it was the right thing to do.
In your opinion, what are some of the mistakes singles make in choosing a mate or in wanting to get married?
Well, it kind of goes back to your first question about the pressure. And I think a lot of times singles don't really know themselves very well. And I think the other thing, they tend to be desperate. And when you're desperate, I think you're in a hurry. And so you don't do enough to check out the background of your potential spouse. Kind of like that, not having that buffer zone of courting. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes even Christians, they tend not to put God first because it's such a hurry to get married that we kind of begin to compromise our standards. Probably the biggest thing, John, that people, some will want to hear, some may not want to hear, is that too many Christians, there's a really high percentage of Christians who are sexually active before marriage. Mm-hmm. And having worked some for the government with administration of children and family and the research they did, back when I had a marriage initiative, when you have sex before marriage, it lowers your chance to have a successful marriage. And so, because you don't really understand commitment and you're physically close, but you're not emotionally and spiritually and intellectually close a lot of times, right, which you need to have a good marriage. A lot of times, no premarital counseling. And we actually recommend that couples, even if they're not married, go to a marriage conference or retreat. I mean, they have to stay in separate facilities, but we think that's a good thing so they can see what involved in marriage, things are involved in marriage. There are other things like their views on money. Some people look at money as power, some security, one's a spender saver. So there's several things like that I think are really important. and, knowing how to handle conflict. So I think those are a few of the things I think are really important that some mistakes that singles make.
I don't know why I thought of this, but you talked about money, and I was thinking about that scene from one of the early episodes of The Cosby Show where Theo had this money in his hand, and he was talking about moving out, and he had so much money left. Dad said, "Do you plan on having a girlfriend?" He goes, "Yes," and he took the rest of the money out of his hand.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. That is true. That's pretty funny.
Now, you make reference several times in your book to Psalm 139. Kind of give us a general overview of what that psalm says and how it relates to dating and marriage and in life in general.
Well, I think it's a really great verse. And in Psalm 139, verses 13 through 16, it's where God is talking really to David, but David's talking to God and kind of praising God how he made it. And basically a couple things that God didn't make a mistake. The other thing is that he's made it amazingly complex. But he also calls us his workmanship, and he calls us, in some translations, he calls us wonderful. In other translations, he calls us marvelous. And that blows me away that the God of all creation will call you and me marvelous. And so, again, it goes back to the whole idea of self-worth. You don't need to feel less than if you're not in a dating relationship. It doesn't mean something's wrong with you. And I just think it's really cool. And then the latter part of that verse 16, talks about how God did not make us to squeeze into the days. He actually made the days for us. And that God has this great destiny plan for us. And I think that's just really a great gift that God gives us. Every day we awake, just 24 hours we can use to glorify Him. And so I just think it's really a very neat passage where God is just showering us with His love and calling us marvelous.
How vital is it to a lasting relationship to start as friends before being romantically involved?
Well, it doesn't always happen this way. Sometimes people see each other and start dating, and sometimes that can work out. But it seems to me that some of the very best marriages, they're friends. And the great thing about being friends before you start dating, you don't have the pressure of the romance. You just see each other, even though you're opposite gender. You do a lot of things together. They may even talk to you while you're dating someone else and tell you what's really happening in opposite sex and stuff like that. But just become friends without the pressure of the romance. So you can talk about any and everything without having so much guard to your answers. And I think, when you know about everything about each other, pretty much, then I think the next thing is you begin to say who's going to start liking each other, and then go to romance. It seems to be a very natural deal. And so I talked to a lot of older couples who have been married 50, 60 years, and many of them started out in high school as high school sweethearts, but they were friends first. And I think it's kind of cool. So I think this lays a really good foundation.
And even in the Bible, that's pretty much, in particular in Jewish custom, I don't know if it's still this way or not, but the marriages were arranged by the parents.
Mm.
Now, is it?
Yeah.
Do you know if it's still that way? I don't know. I've never really investigated that.
I think in the very Orthodox, it still is emphasized. There's not as much pressure. But it's funny to say that one of my daughters came to me because she read my singles book, and she said, she's in her not quite in her mid-20s, and she's a professional woman now. She said, "Dad, you know me pretty well." She said, and then she refers to as arranged marriage stuff, and she says, "You probably know me better than I know me." She said, "So you see a neat guy out there you think would be good for me, just let me know and point in my direction." And so I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. So it really meant a lot to me. She would trust me to, do that because, of course, one of my rules is when they start dating somebody, I had to bring them by the house. But it just really meant a lot. She would say that wanted her mother and me to have an input into her life in regards to a potential mate.
Well, that is neat. Yeah, definitely. You raised her right.
Yeah.
Yeah. When today's society, when one states that people should wait until marriage to have sex, it's often met with scorn and derision. Sometimes that's the mildest form of reaction. But if you were counseling someone, how would you explain to them why it's important to wait?
Well, the first thing I do, whether a Christian or not, I just kind of go back to, unfortunately, we tend to look at secular evidence and look at that more importantly than marriage. Than biblical evidence. But even secular research that's been going on for the last 20 years keeps coming up and just documenting that those who have sex before marriage have a lower chance of having a longer lasting marriage. In fact, most break up before they do get married. And then the ones that do get married, a high percentage of them divorce. And then the ones who stay together, it opens the door for them to struggle with commitment. And they have a higher rate of divorce. They have a higher rate of affairs after being married. And so one thing about being about sex before marriage, it's not just about the physical pleasure. To have great sex, you need to connect intellectually, spiritually, and emotionally. And really, from a biblical perspective, the physical act of sex is a celebration of those three connections. And so if you don't have that, then that causes a lot of problems. The other thing is, God's ordained sex. He wants to have sex like crazy. Read 1 Corinthians chapter 7. That's in the context of marriage, and in the context of marriage, sex tends to bond the couple together. But outside of marriage, it tends to be the very opposite. And so it's not that God does not want us to have fun. He wants us to have a great relationship, and that sex is part of it. But kind of what you talked about earlier is the friendship and the communication that's going to last, because if some couples live long enough, one or both are not physically able to keep having sex. So that friendship is what makes the relationship continue to go in their 80s and those who live into their 90s and if older. So does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I never thought about that before. I'm only 50, but I'll be there someday.
You're a young guy if you're only 50.
Well, I'll be 50 in August. I'll be 50 next month. Yeah. And I'm starting to realize the little, nicks and pains, they don't go away in like 24 hours like they used to, when I was 20 or 25.
Yeah, I hear you.
You also stress having mentors in your life. Tell us about some of the mentors that were in your life and how important that is.
Well, one of the great mentors I had was my dad. And, he was not a Christian most of my life and most of his life. I had the pleasure of leading to the Lord my first year at Moody Bible Institute. And about a year and a half later, he died. But just the way he treated my mom, I'll never forget that. Where he treated my sister and me, and he had a strong work ethic. I didn't get that part from him, but I saw him, and my mom always kept saying he's a really good man. He seemed to have great respect and reputation. The next guy who was in my life was Gary Chapman, who, like I said, led me to Christ and discipled me, and still is in my life after all those years. The late T.B. Maston, who was a professor emeritus of ethics at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary when I was there. He taught me a lot about life. He taught me a lot about cultural things, cross-culturally in the Southern Baptist life, which helped me a lot. And there's a guy here in town, Bob Cook, who's kind of like been like another dad, who just celebrated his 90th birthday. His son and I played ball overseas, but the cool thing about Bob is that all Bob's kids were Christians when I met him, but then all his grandkids were Christians as well. So I said, this guy must be doing something right. And so I asked him to mentor me. And a pastor in Chicago, a guy named Don Sharp, who passed on Southside Chicago. So I've gravitated to a lot of, to me, godly men who invested in my life, and I've been really blessed by them.
Well, before we get too far into the interview, tell us where the audience can find out more about your material and your ministry. Okay.
Well, my ministry is called Building Lasting Relationships, or some people call it BLR, for Building Lasting Relationships. They can go to my website, and my website is just my name. It's Clarence, and the Shuler, so it's ClarenceShuler.com. There's no C in my last name, so it's just SHULER, so it's ClarenceShuler.com. And they can go to my website and just find a lot of free videos they can get into. My bookstore says they want to buy the book. And so that's a good place to get it. Or they can also go to Amazon.com and buy the book as well. But I think they go to the website, they really enjoy the different videos as we talk to singles, married people, men, and do some diversity things there as well. So I think they really enjoy the website.
Well, I really enjoyed reading your book, Single and Free to Be Me. Even though I've been married for over 25 years, I learned some things I didn't know, so that I could have used when I was a teenager and trying to talk to women. Well, I guess that kind of leads into my second question. Does today's social media help or hinder relationships?
Well, we talk about that a little bit in the book, that you just need to be careful with one of the things we have noticed is that with so many young people texting today, the result of them texting is that they've lost a lot of their social skills, and they're not very good face to face. And so, but they say things in a text they would never say face to face, and it's kind of it's really kind of a terrible thing that and the way they do it. I mean, there's some great. I'm not saying we shouldn't text, but texting relationships is really people have lost tremendous relational skills until it's actually afraid to talk to someone face to face because it's easier to text and say what you want to say and not worry about facial expression or any response from that. So I think relationship-wise, it has hurt people.
Yeah. I think I say this tongue in cheek. I think it's cheating. I think they should have to call the girl on the phone and actually talk to her and have the sweaty palms and the heart rate accelerated and actually go through what we had to go through, and we had to do that. I mean, I used to make a list of stuff I wanted to talk about, to the girl, and I'd ask her the question. If she went off on some tangent on something, I was just lost because that wasn't my next question.
That's funny.
I suppose that gave me good practice for interviewing people in a way.
Yeah, it did. It did. But yeah, that's true. But I know again when my girl's going to break up with a guy, she said, "I'm going to text him." I said, "No, you won't text him." I said, "At the very least, you'll call him, but you probably do it face to face if possible because it's not right." And it was kind of like you said, she didn't want to face him face to face. I said, and so I think it's not good. And I do know that some people use the internet and stuff to date and stuff, and some of those have worked out well in regards to marriages, but you still have to be careful going through that process. You still have to meet them in person, because there's no substitute for spending time face to face and having that not just quality time but quantity time.
What can the church do to assist singles?
Well, one of the complaints that singles have, I think the church should actually listen to singles and ask the question, how can we help you? But one thing I hear from singles a lot of times is they're struggling being single, and where it seems like the majority of people in church are married. When they go to a counselor, somebody on church staff they're counseling, typically the person will tell them they just need to be more spiritual. But they're a counselor, married couples having problems, they tend not to counsel a single person. And they feel it's a double standard. So they feel like they're tolerated in church but not celebrated. And so there's not a specific thing dealing with singles. And what I found is, so no one preaches sermons for singles. No one talks about relationships or dating, which would help not just the older singles, it would help the high school kids and college kids to understand relationships and stuff like that. So I think that's some of the first things I do is listen to the singles, but then also the senior pastor will periodically preach a sermon for singles on relationships.
And I've also experienced in a different church I went to many years ago, it seemed like it was a big church. It almost seems like singles were being, I hate to use this word, I can't think of another word to use, were being herded into a certain group to try to pair them off. Right. They would have singles parties, singles events. Right. And that just, when that happened, that really rubbed me the wrong way. Because that goes back to I think that goes back to her original question. It puts pressure on them, and it also inadvertently, whether consciously or not, you're telling singles, hey, you should be married. There's something wrong with you if you're not looking to get married. And I just think that's very harmful.
Well, you're right. And in fact, one thing I like about our pastor where I'm going to church now is that he's really against that. And so they're trying to find a good way to serve singles without trying to herd them feel forced together. And even a lot of these online dating services are now initially having group parties where people will go together and have a cooking party or whatever. And it's a group that's not a one-on-one, but you can meet somebody while you're there with the group. And so that puts a lot of pressure on people. And I remember traveling overseas playing basketball. Most cultures didn't date. If you were dating a girl one-on-one, you're getting pretty serious. And our coaches told us before we went out, said, you have to go out in groups. If you're going out with these girls, you cannot go to girl one-on-one, else you might not be making a trip home with us. Yeah. So that's what got our attention.
You're listening to Victory Talk Radio here on Victory Radio. And if you'd like to learn more about our show, you can go on Facebook.com and just do a search for Victory Talk Radio. And while you're there, please like us, and you can find out about past guests and current guests and upcoming guests on our page. And again, we're talking with Clarence Shuler, who wrote the book Single and Free to Be Me, and he's written several books, and I want to turn our attention to one that he wrote several years ago, but I think it's still so relevant in today's society, just this year, and it's called Winning the Race to Unity. It just seems like, and my heart is breaking to see what's happening in our country with the racial divide that's happened just in the last, I guess, 12 to 16 months, and it's hard to watch. And from my own perspective, I've never understood really what drives people, motivates people to separate people on race or class or any kind of division. So I want to talk a little bit about that book. And early in your book, you talk about your first experience with racism at a sporting event. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, if I think what you're talking about is, are you talking about the boys from Wake Forest and us playing together in the YMCA league? Is that what you're talking about? Okay.
Yes.
Well, back then I'm a little bit older than you are. I'm 61, and so that was right. I think 1968 or so, when there was a lot of racial tension, and we were in North Carolina. And anyway, we were playing this black YMCA because everything was segregated. But we would sneak up to Wake Forest and play in there, and we made friends with some of the white kids whose parents were actually faculty members at Wake Forest. And whenever we were playing this league, they wanted to come play with us. And I was saying, like, no, you can't play because, it's an all-black league. I'm worried about protecting them and all stuff like that. And just, it's just crazy. But these some crazy, what we would call crazy young white boys, and they determined to play. And it was an amazing deal because when I first walked into the Y, everybody just got quiet because they were grown men and not just boys. But eventually, and then it's kind of amazing. My best friend, one of my best friends out of that, is a guy named Denny Hooks, who was that son of the athletic director back then, Gene Hooks. And Denny was a great jump shooter, but he was really slow. And so he would shoot, and they would knock him down, and we would stop and we would fight. And so our games were only supposed to last about 32 minutes, supposed to be 4 8-minute quarters. Our games might last 2 hours, and no one's thrown out, no technical. But after a while, these young white guys earned respect of the black refs, who were adult men. And we ended up coming in second, playing for the championship. And I remember that because, of course, right before the game, when the refs told us, now look, y'all did a good job getting the championship, but you ain't going to win this league. and so they made sure we didn't. But it was very funny. But also, I made the All-Star team, but also Jimmy, who was our center, Jimmy Williams, he made the All-Star team too. So for them to vote, have a white guy make the All-Star team, and there were only 5 spots. That was pretty impressive. So here I looked and saw these non-Christians over a period of time learn to respect these young white kids who were pretty wealthy kids, but they didn't ask for anything. They didn't make excuses, and in some sense, they were fearless. And of course, in some sense, they had no idea what they were doing anyway, because I've reconnected with some of them over the years, and it's just really a kind of amazing story. And I was asking one of my mentors, why am I so close to Denny? And he said, well, when you go to war with someone, you always stay close. And I guess that's true in some sense. Denny and I went to war just trying to be on the same team and play basketball. And it was just huge at a time when segregation was really the law and the unofficial law of the land.
Right. Well, God used you and blessed you through sports in your life as an avenue for unity. Tell us about that.
Well, it just basketball is kind of an easy deal, and so I've used that. Guys allowed me to use that to play at Moody. I was the first African American to play basketball there, and I'll be captain. Then we traveled overseas to Africa and Europe playing ball, and then we used it in inner city. And so I've used with kids, black and white. I coached kind of suburbs of Winston-Salem one time. My whole team was white, and I was their coach. And then at a church that Gary Chapman goes to, Calvary Baptist Church in Winston-Salem, I coached their team, and they were all white. And I was amazed at the parents. It didn't tell me right away, but later on, the parents said it really made a big impression on them to see me coaching their kids. And so, so I think they learned a lot. I think I learned a lot too. And and there were concerns at times because we were way out in some places where in the country where there were no blacks at all. So had concerns at times about them make it back home. But it was just, I think love, and especially Christ's love, supersedes racism.
Amen. Yeah. And you did some mission work while you were at Moody College, right?
At Moody Bible Institute in Chicago, yes. At Moody put tremendous, I wouldn't say, pressure, but they really taught you a lot about doing missions. That's a big deal for Moody. They have a lot of overseas missionaries, and some locally. And so I didn't want to go and spend the whole summer in one place and stay there for 6 or 8 weeks, but I was fortunate to make this all-star basketball team, which was part of Sports Ambassadors. And they travel the globe, so I got to go to Africa twice in different parts of Europe, and I was as a student at Moody Bible Institute. So it was just a really tremendous experience. And you got to see missionaries and see what they did, see the ones who were good, see the ones who weren't so good. You learned about other cultures, and really you learned a lot about yourself and your faith. And for me, John, I got to see the God that's so much bigger than I could ever imagine.
Mm-hmm. Is the Christian church doing enough to solve the problem of racial division?
No, I don't think so. I think the church doesn't like to talk about money, doesn't like to talk about racism. Because in racism, I mean, when you're trying to defeat that and you're saying everybody's equal, people actually struggle with that. We don't struggle with that theologically. We struggle with that in our daily theology and how we live it out. And so we don't really want to do that. And then there's a struggle with the whole idea of sharing power and equality. We don't know what that looks like. And so I think that's a struggle that the church has in talking about this whole idea of equality and what that should look like, and that we all belong to God as Christians, and I need to share the gospel with everybody, no matter who they are, if they don't know Christ. So I think we struggle with that a lot. I think the church doesn't like to do things that's uncomfortable, doing.
Well, you mentioned also the term racial reconciliation in your book. Is that really an accurate term, and should we be using, and why or why not?
Well, no, that's kind of my soapbox, but I think a couple things that when you use the term racial reconciliation, Latinos or Hispanics have told me that term usually doesn't include them. And I think too much in our society, especially the Christian community, only talks about black and white. I'm really excited about our church I attend here in the Colorado Springs Calvary Worship Center. There's black, white, Latino, Asian, and I'm not sure who else, but it's a real good mix. But if you break down the word racial reconciliation, it's the word reconciliation. The prefix means to go back to a previously good relationship. And we really haven't had that in America. So when you talk to someone who's trying to decide between becoming a black Muslim or Christianity, they say, well, if you're wrong historically about this racial reconciliation thing, then you're wrong about Jesus too. So it carries a greater consequence using that term. And analytical people of color are really offended by that term, racial reconciliation. But so it's really not the best term to use. I use the term biblical diversity because it helps people see that God really does emphasize diversity. If you read 1 Corinthians chapter 12, in that chapter it's talking about verses about spiritual gifts. You can take the application of the principles and apply it to different cultures, and that all the cultures God made, we need each other. There's an interdependency there when we come together. And I think that God gets his best when the different cultures come together, as opposed that we can do something good in separate cultures, but I think he gets the very best when we all come together, and I think he's most glorified when we all come together.
Well, and I think a lot of Christians probably have read right past the passage in Revelation where it says that in heaven there'll be people from every tongue, tribe, language, and race and class. I mean, everybody's going to be there. Now, you raise a valid point in your book also about partnership versus paternalism. I got an education on what paternalism was. Explain what that means and the difference between them and how that is negatively affecting the racial relationships.
Well, often, let me give you an example. There was a really well-known African-American speaker, and this group of whites really wanted to work and improve race relations, and so they, without talking to the local blacks in their community, pastors and stuff, they just hired this guy in Broadman, had a big event, and very few of the blacks showed up, and so they were really mad that the blacks didn't show up. They said, "Hey, we got this black speaker. You guys didn't come out and support him." And they said, "Well, you didn't involve us in the process. Plus, this guy is great for you guys, but he didn't relate to us as black people, even though he's black." And so all that kind of blew them away. And so when I talk about paternalism, they were doing what they thought was best for the people right there in the city that would not go talk to them about what they want to go give to them, which is kind of paternalistic, as opposed to developing a partnership and saying, "Hey, we want to improve race relations. What's a good way for us to try and do that? How can we work together trying to figure something out?" And so people of color really will be brought in at the planning stage of stuff like that, which creates a partnership, which may take a lot longer to get things done, but in the end you have a better product and more people will attend it, and it'll help you reach your goal.
Now, you touched on this a minute ago, and you mentioned in your book that the failure of the Christian church to reach out to black had pushed some into the religion of Islam. I'm going to play, and I just found this last night. I know this was God preparing me for this interview because I had never heard this before. This is an interview, I guess this was done back in the late 60s, early 70s with Muhammad Ali, and this is what he said and the reason why he converted to Islam. Take a listen and I'll get your comments about it.
And I had to leave that restaurant in my hometown where I went to church and served in their Christianity and fought and daddy fought in all the wars. Just wanted to go to Medley. Couldn't eat downtown. I said, something's wrong. And from then on, I've been a Muslim.
Yes, I was going to ask you about what attracted you to the
truth, the teachings of Elijah Muhammad on how black people's been brainwashed, how they've been taught to love white and hate black, how we've been robbed of our names in slavery, we were robbed of our culture, we were robbed of our true history, so it left us a walking dead man. So you got black people in all white country, and they don't know nothing about themselves, they don't speak the language, they're just mentally dead. And this is happening all over the world. But the first place that will rise will be the black people of America, and then the rest of them will. But it's going. I was one who heard the truth. When I heard that we don't have our names, we don't speak our true Arabic language, we were robbed of Islam, our true religion, and we've been made deaf, dumb, and blind in slavery, and Elijah Muhammad was taught by Allah, who we refer to as God, to teach us the truth that will free us. And when I heard it, I've been free ever since. I have no racial problems. I don't go where I'm not wanted. I'm proud, and Islam did it. So, and after these things that I heard in church, preaching and watching this and that, I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't pinpoint it. But as soon as I heard the truth that Elijah Muhammad teaches us in America, it made me accept it.
Kind of chilling, isn't it?
Yeah, I couldn't hear the very first part, but I've heard some of the statements from him before, yes.
And you mentioned in your book that sometimes that pushes people towards Islam because it seems to be more attractive to them.
Well, it's kind of like Dr. Martin Luther King wanted to go to actually a conservative, Christian school initially, for college and stuff like that, but a conservative Christian school would not let him in because he's black, so he went up north to school and was accepted there, and a lot of people complained he went to a liberal school, but they let him in. They didn't have a problem with that. I think Martin Luther King with Muhammad Ali, it's interesting that he later has said that his religion has left him empty. He said he's conquered the world, but hadn't really found the real true peace, which his religion, Islam, is supposed to provide him, but it doesn't, because no religion apart from Christianity, which is really not a religion, it's a relationship, can provide that inner peace only through Jesus Christ. But I think he saw the hypocrisy, because I think he was up in Kentucky and the struggle with the church, and really, I know my parents were concerned about me going to Gary's church, because basically we were understanding that a lot of white church members, some deacons were actually bombing black churches. So I think so I see where he can get that, but where someone is black, white, Latino, Asian, whatever, and they mistreat us, my thing is you shouldn't let some people who may be hypocrites keep us from the truth. And so it's really unfortunate because, like I said before, later, Muhammad Ali has found later in his life that Islam really did not give him the peace he thought it would give, And so, and you only get that through Jesus Christ.
Exactly. Amen. Well, he mentioned something very interesting, though, that almost in passing. He said Islam was the true religion of blacks. And I Through stuff I've read is that particularly back during the Civil War era, that blacks, their faith is what kept them going during that time.
Well, if you go back to slavery, especially if you go back and read my book, you will see that African Americans made the greatest progress in the world document system in 400 years than any other culture or race, but it's really based because they're committed to Jesus Christ. You look at all the inventions and stuff like that we did. Because we really, really committed to the Lord, and I think God just really blessed to do that. And so I think now some of the struggles we're going through now is because we, in some sense, we're sort of walking away from that. But we're not the only culture, but we walk away from a lot of our heritage. So, which is really steeped in biblical truths and traditions.
Right.
So that does make a difference.
Yeah, and I like that you wrote a chapter in your book on some of the great contributions, and I tell you what, the first one on the list, it's the middle of, going to the middle of July. Air conditioning was invented by Frederick M. Jones. Praise God for that man. He invented air conditioning on July 12th, 1949. So, yeah. And some of these really, what surprised me was not the contributors, but the dates of when they did it, because I had no idea air conditioning was that old. I'm trying to look at it real quick now and figure out what was some of the others that really surprised me as far as the early dates of it. Clothes dryer, 1862. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Is that? Obviously that was. I'm assuming that was an electric clothes dryer, but some type of clothes dryer. And that was GT.
There was a manual one that you could actually dry your clothes, and so. Part of being slaves, people thought slaves were dumb. They're pretty ingenious. They figured out a way to not always use your back, but use your head. So that's where a lot of these inventions came from. And a lot of these folks who did the inventions were Christians.
We're talking about the book called Winning the Race to Unity, and we're speaking with Clarence Shuler. And we had emailed back and forth in the last couple of days, and in the early 1970s, there was a woman named Jane Elliott who conducted a very daring and courageous experiment. And tell us a little bit about what that experiment was and what the implications of it were.
Well, she was pretty amazing. I don't know who turned me on to it, but she was right after the assassination of Martin Luther King. And she was from Iowa, the school system in Iowa, and where she was, it was all white. And she thought we need to do something about that. She needed to teach her kids something about that. I think she was teaching third grade. And so her experiment was she separated kids from, I think, brown eyes, blue eyes. I think that's what it was. But the kids had different color eyes. And so the kids had the brown eyes. One day, she told them they were the smartest ones in the world and they were really good. And then she told the blue eyes that same day they were really dumb. And she discriminated against them. And then based on her discrimination, she looked at the results. And the kids who had brown eyes, who she told were great and special, they just super achieved and finished all tasks really early. The kids who were told blue eyes and they weren't very good did poorly. And then the next day she flipped them. She flipped them and got the same results. And I thought it was really interesting in one of the video clips. I actually use it sometimes I do diversity consulting for organizations. Well, some of the kids who were being discriminated against, they said, well, what's the use in trying? And they didn't use the word discrimination if everything's against us. And these are just third graders. And just really quickly, even some of the kids who were best friends but had different color eyes, so one was in the good class, one was in the poor class, they ended up fighting and hitting each other. And she said it was amazing what the emphasis on race did to her sweet third grade class during that experiment. And it's just pretty powerful.
It is.
And then even later as adults, she had them come back and she talked to them and they all talk about that. It's an amazing clip, yeah.
And it's scary how quickly that they slipped into prejudice, almost at the drop of a hat.
Yes.
And then there was also, I think later, didn't she actually go into a corporate boardroom and do the same thing with adults? And it was the same thing there.
Yes, she did. You're right.
And we actually, when I taught Sunday school with a good friend of mine, he's gone on to be with the Lord now, but we did that one Sunday each year. We would separate them by the color of their eyes, and the brown eyes were made to sit in the back. We made them wear gaudy ties. He would go out to like Goodwill and find the ugliest ties he could find and make them put them up. But I'm telling you, that class lasted 45 minutes. Within 20 minutes of doing that, you could see the difference. And those kids that were discriminated against, were crying. My daughter had to go through that, and I felt so bad. I mean, I was crying myself for having to go through that. But it's something they'll never forget. Hopefully we'll stay with them. Of course, then after about 20 or 30 minutes, we flipped it, and made the other side of the class experience the same thing. But I think it's called A Class Divided. I think it was done as a PBS special. And if there's anybody out there that hadn't seen it, I would highly recommend it. I don't know if it's on Netflix or online anywhere, but it's definitely a major thing you should watch. Well, what are some biblical steps we can take to develop cross-cultural relationships?
Well, I think one of the first ones we can do is actually just really the fact that we're made in God's image. And if we're made in God's image, everyone has value. And then I think the other thing is realizing we're both equal. And I emphasize, too, that John, you probably have gifts and abilities I don't have. And if we're in the same church, then I need those gifts and abilities that you have. And so, because your spiritual gift was not for you, it's for me. And so we share and we grow together, and I think we develop an interdependency. But I think those are really important things. I think another good thing we do a lot, we don't tend to have a lot of results, is come together and talk to each other about what our struggles are. But then I think the next thing we need to do is taking some practical steps to make a difference. When Gary Chapman led me to Christ, he took some really risky steps going in a predominantly white church to lead me to Christ. And I remember after he left, they actually came to us and said blacks and whites should not go to the same church, shouldn't worship together. But I would see sometimes, even as a little kid, being 14, 15, how people would look at him because he was friends with me. And it just, again, he was not the popular, famous book writer at the time, so he took a lot of risks to be my friend, and wouldn't stop being my friend, which is pretty amazing. So I think one thing too is commitment and be willing to take some risks. Kind of the boys you talked about at the beginning of this interview with the book, who were willing to go into a black white because it's just their love of basketball. And so we need to take some risks sometimes and be willing to be minority in different places to make a difference.
You reference an article that was written by Barbara Williams that explains why many African-American Christians struggle with reconciliation. What are some of the reasons for that?
One thing she alludes to or talks about the whole idea of trust. There's a history that makes it difficult for a lot of African-Americans to trust, the white community. And so I think she talks about that. And then I think also the agenda. What's the real agenda when people come together? We don't always know what the agenda is. Sometimes one thing is stated, but another thing is really wanted.
Another thing we talk about is, do we sometimes, and this applies to both blacks and whites, do we put too much emphasis on saving souls without, we want somebody to be saved, but do we bypass listening to their concerns?
Well, yeah, I think, and I know it sounds crazy, we do need to share a gospel with everybody, but our gospel needs to be holistic. When Jesus walked the earth, when he ministered to people, he did not just deal with their souls. He also often dealt with their physical condition. If they need to eat, if they needed clothing, if they needed whatever they needed. So it's kind of a holistic perspective. And so I think sometimes we say, well, they became Christians, and then we're gone. There's no relationship. And so I think when I look at Scripture, it tends to be a relationship. So yeah, I think we do need to be concerned about their concerns. And that's one of the divides that people have. Black and white and Latino and Asian, Native American, is that a lot of times we don't know the needs of other people because they tend not to be real issues for us. Because we, like you said, want to get saved, but we don't necessarily want to help them in their condition, whatever the situation might be.
Right. And there were two things that came to mind when you were talking about that. My friend Gene Wine, who I mentioned to you earlier, went on to be with the Lord, but he used to say when we were teaching the kid that Jesus often did something for the person before he witnessed to him or presented the gospel to him. I mean, he would ask somebody, "What do you want me to do for you?" And he would stop and listen to their concerns. And I think that's something that's sadly missing today. And I think the other one, Paul talks at length, and I just learned this lesson a couple of years ago. Sometimes we tend to think that the gospel has to be presented in the exact same manner, methods, like 1, 2, 3, 4 steps to everybody. And Paul talked about, no, to the Greeks, I become like the Greeks. To the Romans, I become like the Romans. He learned about their culture and then incorporated the gospel into it and spoke to them on their terms. And why do we miss that today?
Well, I think you because again we're not sensitive. Like today, if you want to share the gospel with millennials, you have to build a relationship with them. You can't just pull out a booklet and whip it out and pray with them and be gone. You have to build a relationship. It takes 3 or 4 times as long to do that. It may take 3 or 4 different encounters with that same person before you can even share the gospel with them. And so I think we have to. Jesus was great at meeting people where they were. And I think we need to learn how to do that.
Yeah, I definitely. And like when I think you talk about this at length in your book. When he went to the Samaritan woman, he went to her. She didn't come to him. He crossed into her world and waited, and was there at the well when she came to him. Yeah,
you're right. Yeah, and he put himself on her turf. He actually empowered her because he asked her, for water, and so he put her in a position of authority, which she, knowing her history, she didn't typically have that. So, and then he had staying power when she tried to reject him. And so, that's a great classic of going to somebody and earning the right to share the gospel.
In today's society, is the lack of the willingness to be servants, does that contribute to racial division?
Well, that's true for everybody. I think servanthood is counterculture. Especially in our society today, is more entitlement. It's all about me. I tell my buddies I kind of get tired of watching ESPN now because it's more about their stuff off the field than on the field. But it's not about servanthood, it's about getting. And serving people, it just makes all the difference in the world. And I think that's what God's called us to do. And so I think when we serve cross-culturally, or, a lot of times I'm the first African-American to work for an organization or be someplace, and sometimes I'll see people looking and not sure how to respond. And so I just simply say hello first. And it's amazing, if I say hello first, that puts everybody at ease, or most people at ease, and they respond back, and they kind of go from there. And it'd be great if I walked in some place and they spoke to me first, but if they don't, what's the big deal? I can say it first and just... So I think it's that kind of attitude. It can't always be about me.
I was thinking about this. Maybe God put this on my heart, but I mean, if you're serving somebody willingly, you're not going to have any problems with division, whether it be on race or class. I mean, you're not going to hate the person you're serving if you're doing it willingly, because servanthood is an act of love.
Well, you're right. I don't know if I remember when I was in Chicago, there was a guy named Mr. Erickson who was white. He was probably 83 years old. Back in the early 70s, it was really, it's dangerous now, but it was really dangerous back then. And there are certain places you couldn't go if you were white, and you shouldn't go if you were white. But he could go anywhere in the city, and it was amazing. And I was black, and I couldn't go anywhere in the city. I had to earn the right. It took me a year before I could go to those different places. But because he was serving the community and serving those kids, he earned the right, he earned the respect, and he earned the trust of so many blacks in the community throughout Chicago. He'd go anywhere. And he was really a beloved guy. So it does make a difference.
What are some of the rewards of racial unity?
Well, I think one of the rewards is that, I think we glorify God. I think the other thing is we create more peace. As some of the rewards of racial unity, we learn more. Like you said, you were learning more about stuff reading the book. Well, as being the first black in a lot of white situations, I learned more. I think we increase our friendship. It helps us with our cross-cultural skills. And so, like, I enjoy traveling around the globe, and so all those things really help. And I tell you nothing, John, the more I learn about other people and other cultures, I learn about myself, but I also see more about God. And all the people God's created, when I look around, they're really beautiful. And they're different, but they're beautiful. And it's just really kind of cool. And so the more I see about them, the more it helps me fill in some of my gaps in my own life. So I think there's tremendous rewards of racial unity.
Yeah.
From my perspective. So
that reminds me of that old song by Ray Stevens, "Everything is Beautiful," which is true.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, it seems that here in 2015 we are fighting the same divisions that we were fighting 50 years ago. Do you see this struggle as a spiritual warfare as well?
Well, yeah. I think Satan is very happy to have the different races and cultures go at each other and fight each other. And so I do think there's a lot of spiritual warfare involved. And, you know, the indoctrinating kids, I said, hate is learned and is taught. And so, yeah, it is spiritual warfare, and that's what Satan's all about. He's about hate, self-destruction, and killing people. So if he's in the middle of that, when you see it happening, you know he's involved in the process.
It seems like he's working overtime this year, that is for certain, trying to stir up that hate. But I know after it's been, today would have been 2 weeks since the shootings in Charleston, I was just so inspired by the victims' families and their willingness to forgive this man. What can inspiring actions of those Christians teach us about racial and Christian unity?
Well, I think it teaches our Christians the humble spirit, the grace, like I said, forgiveness. I think it helps us tell that life is valuable. And, you know, those people who forgave that young man, they have peace, and they're not letting the hatred destroy them. And my hopes and prayers this young man to come to know Christ, and those who indoctrinate him may come to know Christ. But I think it's really amazing. As an African American, from my perspective, it's always been open seasonal on particularly black males. But and so it's dangerous being African American because, you know, we've seen not just in the last couple of weeks, but over the history of years, you know, guys getting shot, you know, on a regular basis. Some of the scariest thing is, you know, even what police are doing. 12-year-old boys with water guns getting shot. And so I don't think that's going to change. But I think that because this thing in Charleston got so much media presence that it was a great opportunity for the gospel of Christ to come out what it's really all about. Because what they're doing is really, truly supernatural. This whole forgiving piece. Right. It is actually amazing.
Well, it'll be interesting because I look at that and what happened, because the true Christianity was on display, not what a lot of times the media, you know, wants people to believe about Christianity. I'm wondering if this, we won't know this till years from now, if this is a turning point in this type of thing where, you know, more Christians should be displaying Christian unity. I hope so anyway. And then I know when I saw what they did, I mean, if I had a family member that was shot by somebody, I'm not sure I would hope that I would have the peace to forgive that person, but I'm not really sure I would. You know, it's that inspires me to pray to God to bring me into more alignment with His will.
Well, you know, historically for African Americans, though, this is not unusual. I mean, it is. When you look at all the crimes committed against African Americans in America, the response of African Americans, for a great part, have been like what you saw in Charleston. I think this time it's got a lot of media presence, but that's not uncommon. I mean, there are those who fight back, and there's a need for, you know, protests and different things, but it's not that uncommon. And I guess it goes back to the Christian roots that we got from a lot of the slaves who were believers either before they came over or became believers when they were here. So, and that goes a long way.
Right. And again,
you got to remember, the civil rights movement was based on really on Christian principles, you know, initially.
And again, the book is called "Winning the Race to Unity," and this is its author is Clarence Shuler. And I've enjoyed so much talking to you. I've enjoyed reading your books. I've got I think one more I've still got to read. You sent me several of them, but I've enjoyed them and learning new things, and I like to do that. I always ask God to teach me new things, and just thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, John, thanks so much for having me on, and thanks for your patience with me. Thanks for taking time to read the books. I'm glad you've enjoyed them, and again, I'm just really grateful to you and just another brother in Christ, and hope someday I get to meet you face to face. So thank you so much again for letting me be on the show and talk about the website and the books and stuff like that as well.